about yourself. And if you would tell us, for instance, about the if you tell us about yourself and about the Caritas Christi, and about secular institutes in general, get us started, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
All right.
And if I'm not going in the right direction, you stop me. And redirect me. Okay. As you can hear, I'm not an American born. I was born in Belgium and raised there, where I did my PhD in ancient philosophy. And then I went to do Islamic studies in England. And then after some time, I came to the States to teach. So that's the background. I am a member of Caritas Christi, which is a secular institute. No, I think I have to explain to you what that is. Consecrated life is an umbrella term that includes religious orders, societies of the common life, like the Sister of Charity, that include also the consecrated virgins, I think also some hermits, and secular institute. So all those people commit themselves to celibacy. I didn't use the term make a vow because some may not make a vow, but most of them do a vow of celibacy. It can be another term. Some make a promise of celibacy, but that's... So, Secular Institute is part of that. It's a newcomer. We were officially erected, All Secular Institute, in 1947. What's behind that? It's a very different vocation from religious life. Because the idea, religious life, you have to be a sign. That's why it's very public. Why do you have the habit and so on? You live in community, and usually you have a specific apostolate. We are quite different. It's the idea to spread, so to speak, the church everywhere. So in places that are not necessarily very religious. So we are like the leaven in the dough. That's one of the main images of it. The salt, the perfume. So the idea that we are spread out in the general, ordinary way of life. So we should not have at all habits, distinctive signs, or anything like that. Originally, that was very important that people would show that ordinary Christian can lead a holy life, because before Vatican II, quite often the lay people were considered second-rate citizens. And that was to show you could live a perfectly ordinary life. We work like anybody else in any profession. One of our most remarkable members was a hairdresser. But she had quite interesting conversation with the customers. So we can be in any kind of milieu. And in fact, it's more normal that we would be working outside religious institution than in religious institution. Because it's the idea that we can be in situation where usually people don't meet much people from the church. So it's sometimes we are compared to pioneers who go in. So it's quite different. You have a range of secular institute. Mine is at the utmost distance, so to speak, of religious orders. We have no community life. Never use the word community. We sometimes speak of living in communion, but not in community. Some secular institutes have sometimes some community life. We don't. It's in fact forbidden. So we live like ordinary people, any kind of profession, and the Institute is there to help us on the spiritual life, but on no other level. So when we get old, the Institute will do nothing for us. We have no retirement home, we have nothing like that. We are designed to share the same vulnerability than ordinary lay people. In some countries that can be very difficult to live. We have members in West Africa, very poor countries. The Institute can do nothing for them financially. We may help them for organizing retreat, but nothing for their own life, personal life. So it's quite different. We are usually quite scattered. In the States, in the past, we had some groups that could meet every month. It's disappearing. And the new vocations are usually very far from any other member. We always have had, traditionally, people who were living, I don't like the word, but in isolation. So they won't meet other members regularly. So, particularly when they become old, they may be unable to travel. They may not be able to join. Usually we have an annual retreat. They may not be able to go to the retreat because it's too complicated for the travel. But that's part of the life. You take that risk to share in the same vulnerability than many people who may not have any more family or anything and who are living alone and don't have that much contact. So it's a very different way of forming people. We don't take them out of their ordinary life. You do your formation while keeping your job and so on. You don't go to a special place for 2 years, or that doesn't exist. So it's, on the one hand, it allows us to have all sorts of people that probably could not fit easily in religious life. For instance, we have a certain number of members who have been married, have children, grandchildren, and so on, no problem. They need to be in order with Rome to have their marriage annulled or a special dispensation, but we have had members with fairly young children. They remain at home, they raise their children, no problem. We can have people who are very handicapped or disabled, because as long as they can support themselves financially, we don't care if they are disabled. Because we have no common apostolate, nothing. As long as we think they have a vocation and they can manage financially. In the States, we have a member who in fact lived quite a lot of her life in an iron lung. She got polio at age 14. And now she's 2 hours per day, she can be sitting in a wheelchair and she can only move her head. She's a remarkable woman. I visited her once and it was a great experience. So we have a facility, and if people have a profession in which you move around or something, no problem. We can be anywhere. we have always had members who were living very far from any other member. So it's not surprising. I am the only member in Washington. If I am lucky, I see other members of the United States once a year at the retreat. If I am unlucky, I may not do so because I am at the General Council somewhere in the world at that time. Therefore, I miss the US retreat and I will not see anybody from the US for a couple of years. So it's a very different type of life. We want to fit in the ordinary circumstance. That's why we have no outside sign. We will never introduce ourselves in usual circumstances, X from a secular institute. That's not done. In fact, originally they were extremely secretive, so that people didn't know they were members. And we are still practicing what we call discretion, so that anybody would feel at ease with us. We are not, so to speak, special. So it's the observance of discretion has changed a bit. The old members, some are very, very strict. They don't want anybody to know. They would try to do everything to avoid anybody would guess. We have changed that particularly because otherwise we cannot recruit. In the old time they thought priests would recruit for us. No, priests have other things to do, and they usually don't know about us, so how would they recruit for us? So some of us accept to go to more public situation, or when the archdiocese organizes something about vocation, we may go, which in the old time wouldn't have been the case. So we live very ordinary life. It's a fascinating life, but it takes a certain type of personality, because you are left quite often to your own device. So our constitution are, in some sense, very flexible. There are very few, very specific things we have to do, because you have to adapt to any kind of profession. We had the case at some stage in New York. A new member was working in hostelry, and she was sous chef in a big hotel in New York. Well, they were meeting once a month on the weekend. Hey, if you work in a big hotel as a sous chef, it's the time you work the most, is the weekend. So either the other would accept to meet another day, or she couldn't meet with them. Because what the matter, if you like, of apostolate is our own job. And we can have any job. You have people who are in teaching, you have people who are somebody in theater, anything. So it varies quite a lot. And you need people who can live a vocation without much, I would say, emotional support. Because we live alone. We may live with members of our family, but we don't live with other members. That's a total no-no. And when you get old, I have known some of the older members when I was in the National Council. You phone to them, they can no longer go to meetings because traveling is too complicated and they are all too scattered to manage that some would pick them with the car and take them. And they may not have close relatives. And some on the phone, it was amazing. I had never met them, so suddenly you are on the phone. And they would tell me, oh, I am so lucky. My neighbors take me to the supermarket. X does that for me. I'm really lucky. And you know that they didn't have any more close relatives, niece or nephews or anything. But that means that you must be able to function with very little emotional support. And that formation is usually, at least in the States, at distance. Because when I began, we have what we call a personal sponsor. That's the person who formed you. And she was in Massachusetts. I was in Washington. So I would see her at the retreat, and once I went to visit her when I was in what you would call temporary vow, which is for us is temporary commitment. My personal sponsor was very elderly, a remarkable woman, in Montana. I didn't see her for 5 years. We were working by tapes and letters and phone and things of that sort. So you must be able to handle that. So we are usually quite independent character. Otherwise, you don't survive in that kind of occasion. And we have also sometimes people who are in countries where there is only 1 or 2 members. One of the members of the General Council is from Nigeria. She was the only member in Nigeria. And when you know the situation in Nigeria now she has 2 she's forming. But so it's, in some sense, there is a bond between us that is quite unique. When we meet at retreat or something like that, it's always a great joy. But we are also used to live alone. So after 1 week, we are quite glad. We are not used to too much. So I think it's very helpful for people who have a special profession, feel a special call to a certain activities in life that don't enter into specific religious order. So we have a great variety, which is fun, but it also makes sometimes things extremely difficult because how to maintain contact. Now in the States we are all scattered, except there are still a little nucleus here and there, and the new recruits are very far in distance. They are the only one of their state, like South Dakota. So it's, what is the Lord telling us with that? You can have a consecrated life in that kind of setting. I think when secular institute really officially began, just after the Second World War, I think they saw themselves as quite a lot is showing that lay people could be fully part of the church, because that was not exactly the understanding. After Vatican II, of course, things have changed a bit. I think in our modern societies where people get easily isolated, they live longer, families are less stable. So many people find themselves without much close contact. And that we may have, in some sense, there something to show you can live that kind of situation and be, one hope, showing that you can be happy in that kind of situation. So it's sometimes religious order were at ease with us. They thought, well, we have rivals, we are fighting to get the same people. It's not true at all, because it's a very different kind of vocation. Canon law allows transitus from religious order to secular institute. We have had quite a few cases in some countries, and we have discovered that's a disaster. Those people do not know how to live a lay life. So now we refuse transitus. We tell them, hey, sometimes you interview them and the reason to go to a secular institute are a bit bizarre. Some that seems more serious. Then we tell them, you get the proper papers and so on from Rome. You live 2 years as ordinary lay people, and then we will consider. We are ready to get in contact with you during these 2 years, but we will not begin any real process of discernment as long as you don't have lived 2 full years as totally ordinary people. And it's very difficult to make some people understand the Institute will do nothing financially for you or for your old age. You are on your own. And even if you are in great poverty, and we have members in Africa that live those kind of things, the Institute will do nothing to help you personally. So sometimes people think it's easier, it's not like religious life, you don't have all those rules and those specific things to do. True. But on the other hand, we have no protection. It's why, though, we still keep quite a lot of discretion. Members in Africa and India do make their, what we call definitive dedication and so on. They do make that in public at their parish. Because in Africa and India, if you are not married and not in a religious order, there is something which is a big problem, and their family would still be trying to find a husband for them. So there it's done at the parish. We, in other countries, we don't do that because we think it should be more discreet. Now sometimes some ask some friend to come to the ceremony, which in the old time wouldn't have been done. So that's, there is a special chapter in Canon Law about us in the section on consecrated life. So I'm always amused because some people don't get the consecrated life and religious life. So you hear the intention at Mass. For the consecrated religious, are there some who are unconsecrated? They don't realize that consecrated life is different branches and possibilities, is you have different religious orders. So it's a bit funny sometimes to hear. In the old time, there was another member in Washington who had been the president of the conference, the United States Conference of Secular Institute. She would be fuming when she heard that the intention about only religious life or consecrated religious life. So I had some time to tell her, calm down, it's not worthwhile getting too excited. So I don't know if you have some question. Yes?
What do secular institutes have to teach religious communities?
To teach religious communities, we have nothing special. In the old time, you could find, there was a famous book by Bayer, a Jesuit, who was the big specialist for canon law for the Secular Institute, and you had a list of Secular Institute in that book. Of course, we are no longer at this stage. So now we give leaflets to what is called the Vicar for Religious, for instance. And anyway, when we make our first dedication, or the final ones, our local bishop must be informed, because we are a secular institute of pontifical right. So we inform the bishop, and then if some member would like to leave after the definitive dedication, then we have to go up to Rome to be dispensed of the vow of chastity. We make a vow of chastity and promises of obedience and poverty. It depends, the name depends on various secular institutes. Canon law speaks simply of sacred bonds, but they are more or less as binding as vows, even if they don't make any vows. In Caritas Christi, we make a vow of chastity, plus promises of obedience and poverty. So what you do, secular institutes now are big with the internet. That's the way we recruit. Because some people they want to remain in the world. Because not simply the idea to live fully in the world, it's also to work by means of the world. So it's not at all the idea I get out of the secular life. On the contrary, we think it's through that life that you can touch people. So it's a very different kind of approach. If you go, there is on internet, there is the conference of the United States Conference of Secular Institute. If you go there, they explain a bit generally what Secular Institute is. And then you have something like some 30 Secular Institute, and you can click, and then you know what's specific to each one. You have Secular Institute for Women, that's the most common, Secular Institute for Laymen, and Secular Institute for Diocesan Priests. Sometimes you have one and the same family, so to speak, and you have the three Secular Institute. Sometimes it's only one. Caritas Christi, it's only for women. We don't have a parallel for men or for diocesan priest. No. I don't think canon law would appreciate that. But no, we were laughing because, of course, for security, one of our members, she loves nature. She had a bird, and she had given a name to the bird. I can't remember what name was. And then when you would call her, and she wasn't at home, so that people wouldn't realize she was living alone, she was always, Chip and I are not there. And Chip was the bird. And then the national sponsor one phone and was wondering who was this Chip with whom she was living. And it was simply a bird. So some live with, one was living with her brother who had never married. One who was a biologist suddenly had to take in her home 2 nephews. Something had happened with the parents of these 2 boys, and suddenly she was raising 2 boys. But that kind of things we can easily do because we don't have to change much of our life to do that. Most of our African members are raising children, either their own. In Africa, it's not uncommon that people enter later and have had children of their own without being married, but it's not that uncommon. Or sometimes because with the extended family, is they work and they have a little money, they raise nephews or nieces. So they live with other people. And if you go to their house, it looks perfectly ordinary, if you can call that a house. But
what would distinguish one from the other?
some secular institutes are closer to religious life than mine. So some have sometimes some members living in community, which for us it's forbidden. Some have, sometimes for formation, you go somewhere for 2 years. Our constitution forbid us to own any mother house or anything like that. But that's specific to our constitution. Some have a very distinct apostolate, so they expect every member to be involved in that. Some are linked to specific spirituality. So say they are Dominican, Franciscan, different things. Mine was founded by a laywoman and a Dominican priest. But after a time, originally, we were called the Little Sisters of Catherine of Siena. Now, it was changed for 2 reasons. It was understood as little sister, not in the religious sense, but they realized it could lead to confusion. So they did want to get rid of the little sister quite quickly after the foundation. And also, they decided Catherine of Siena is still one of our patron saints, not to stick with that, because the idea that we could accept women who had any type of spirituality. Because as some of us live quite isolated, in my secular institute, you can remain member of any lay association you were in before. In fact, the first 10 members were all third order Dominicans. Now we have some members now who are third ordered Dominican or Franciscan. I am a member of a lay association. I was already a member of that. So, which is what was called the Daughters of St. Francis de Sales, the St. Francis de Sales Association. So there is no problem. I was already a member of that group of ordinary lay women. Most of them are married. I can remain. And the idea is that somehow, put it in context, it has to be understood properly. We are responsible for our own formation. Is we don't see each other much. Is we don't go anywhere special for formation. We have a formation by correspondence and text. So we should, if we don't have a group nearby, use the resources that are where we are. So it's perfectly normal for me to remain a member of the St. Francis de Sales Association. And in fact, there are influence of St. Francis de Sales on my secular institute. So that it's very free. Other secular institute, it's not like that. I know member of a secular institute, St. Francis de Sales, some of their members were member of the association, St. Francis de Sales. They had to leave it when they became member of the secular institute. We don't. We know each other more or less. I am not sure that I think in big religious order, when you have the General Assembly, I'm not sure how much for the election you really know each other. As far as I can hear from colleagues in religious life, it's the same. We have General Assemblies. We must have one every 6 years. So we have delegate and the people who have responsibilities, but we do not leave our professional life to assume the responsibilities. We remain ordinary lay people. There is no place where we would be. There is no office. The mission statement, if I can put it like that, it's to love God and make him loved. In any circumstance of life. That's why it's very indefinite in some sense, because we have to adapt where we are to see how we do that, and why we don't have a specific apostolate. We have each to do what we think we are called to. So that explains the variety, but that explains people who have, we can be in touch with all sorts of people in life. I don't think you imagine a member of a religious order working as a hairdresser. For us, no problem. You are a hairdresser, you are a hairdresser. Fine. If you think that's where you serve God and that you can, hairdresser talk a lot with some customer and they can have quite a lot of influence in that way. So it's quite, usually people have complex vocation story because they didn't know about secular institute. Priests didn't know much about them, and then it takes a time before they discover. So usually we don't get very young people because they didn't even know about it. They knew they were called, and they were realizing for some reason or another that religious life was not what they were called to. Sometimes simply it began by, I would like it, but I am in circumstances where I couldn't do it for different reasons. It's a bit my case, because when I felt called quite young, at my first communion, but my parents were elderly. I had a sister who was both mentally and physically disabled, and my father was dead against any religion. So when I was 17, and there was that eventually at some stage in my life I would have to support financially my sister. B, at the time, it's before Vatican II, if you enter many female religious order, you enter the order, you couldn't go out to visit your family, which is a big problem when you have elderly parents. And with my sister, particularly with somebody has also a mental disabilities, and in fact she spent 25 years in a psychiatric institution paid by the state. But it's very difficult to get somebody in that case who cannot live if they wish. So you never knew if she decided to live, what would happen. It's very difficult to have all the apparatus to be sure the person can no longer leave the institution if they so wish. So you have all sorts of, because even if at some stage it was clear the physical handicap had gotten worse, so she couldn't easily move, but she was free to leave the place. And if you are dealing with somebody with both, physical and mental handicap, it becomes very complicated because the places that are good for physical handicap don't want somebody with a real mental handicap, emotional, and so on. And the places for that kind of person are not always that well equipped for somebody with a physical handicap. So I never knew if she would suddenly decide she didn't want to be there anymore. Originally, with the system, the state was paying for most of the institution, but if it wouldn't have been the case, after the death of my parents, there wouldn't have been enough money for that. So I had to be able to keep my own profession, which I couldn't have done if I had entered a religious order. And it would have been a bit difficult to say, okay, I enter a religious order, you will never see me anymore. If she couldn't come to visit me on her own steam. So other circumstances can lead people to suddenly think, what do I do? I feel called. Some feel more directly a call to remain in the world. They are completely puzzled because they want to give their life to the Lord, live in celibacy, but they want to remain in the world. Others, it's more they realize after a time that's what they are really called to, but they didn't know. So it's the impossibility to be in religious life that can lead them to. And then after a time they realize, oh no, it's not a second best, it's really what I should do. Does that make some sense? And then we have also a certain number of widows, women who have marriage that floundered completely and they get permission to. Ah, that's an interesting point. The beginnings, they were not originally making any promise of celibacy. In fact, they could leave and get married. Later on, they became some strange kind of religious order without being a religious order. But that's much later. But I think they had been always in the church. Some things coming like that. Some women, I think, had that kind of vocation and simply lived it on their own because there was nothing they could use. And some things were originally designed more in that line, and then because at the time they couldn't imagine women living alone and so on, they got pushed into becoming much more what you call a religious order. So I'm amused because on the website of the United States Conference of Secular Institute, some claim to have been founded in 17 something. It was something that could have been at the time considered simply as a pious association or something like that. But that was a bit in that line. They didn't suddenly come out of. And if you look at the very early time in the church, I'm sure there were people living that there was not a very organized religious life or anything. So, but there was also quite a lot of discussions sometimes, because at the early time when the church began to erect them, their tendency still to try to make them fairly close to religious orders. For instance, the second official text says that secular institute must have a mother house. Mine never had and was already functioning without official things when the secular institute began. So they immediately asked for an indult. And so our constitution forbid it. With the reform of canon law, the text of canon law do not say anything about mother houses for secular institutes. So secular institutes are free to have them or not to have them. It depends on each institute to decide that. For instance, Schoenstatt has several secular institutes, and they have houses. But they are a bit closer to religious order. Some of them live in community, not all of them. And when they go to chapel, they put some kind of cape, like a uniform or something, while no. Yes, but if you look at canon law, when they speak of the secular institute, they try to avoid as much as possible to use religious language like novitiates, postulancy. They use more vague terms to avoid. They say it's very different. You shouldn't be aping, so to speak, the religious order. They have their own value, they are very important, but you are something different. That's why they don't speak of vow, they speak of sacred bonds that can be vows, that can be promises, something. And that depends on each institute as its own. I understand that there is a secular institute, not in the States, but for instance, that specialize in trying to get prostitutes out of prostitution. So they have a very specific apostolates. Others don't, to allow any kind of profession. Yes, Romuald. Most of the recruitment now is internet. Younger women think of a vocation and they use the internet. So they look at religious orders, they think, it's not exactly what I am looking for. And they look at the vocation internet for the diocese or whatever it is, and then they see secular institute, they look. And then they study. I mean, they tell us. I looked at every secular institute, they look on the internet. Yes, they sent, we have, in the States, we have for Caritas Christi. It's a lady who is remarkable. She has cerebral palsy. And when she speaks, she is nearly impossible to understand her. She had a BA in English and she worked all her life. She's retired now. She's very good with computer. So she has the website and people can send their email and then she asks them questions to see if they have a vague understanding of what we are. And then eventually she says, I think somebody, after different things, she sent them a few leaflets and so on. Then she gets in touch with the National Council. She also gets emails from all over the world. And then she is, if you like, she sees that somebody in such a country, if they write in English, she keeps getting with them for some time to be sure they have a vague understanding. And then she puts them in touch with the country, if we have people in that country. Or if we have nobody in that country, then she gets in touch with the General Council. Oh, when somebody new, we do that long distance. And we try to visit them if we can. At some stage now, it's not anymore so secret. We have groups in Vietnam. And a long time we had the logo, you had all the countries, and then you had XXX. That was Vietnam, because it was too dangerous if it would have been known. So, no, they don't seem to. Before they were very afraid that the government would know that they were members. Now they don't seem to. So I suppose the situation is better. But you begin, either sometimes a member has been to that country for their work. We had a member who was in the foreign service. So she recruited people in the Philippines and countries like that. But otherwise, we begin by correspondence, mainly internet now, because with third world country, the mail is terrible. And then we try to visit in the sense that you can find us on the internet if you really look. And we get emails from all over the world. We have a group in Sudan. And they were displaced from one place to another in Sudan. We get them like that. And then you have to see if it is really serious. The big problem for the General Council is to manage the visits, because we work. Some are retired, but visiting West Africa is not that easy. It's a bit rough, to say the least. It's mainly spiritual formation, knowing about the Institute. Every member, even after formation, is what we call a personal sponsor. So that's individual, and it's a very, normally you are in touch with your sponsor once a month, and that's totally individual. It's not that you have a superior and the superior is responsible for 7 or whatever. While people are in formation, the sponsor is appointed by the National Council. But once you have made your definitive dedication, as we call it in the States, then you may request a specific member as your sponsor. But to avoid that it would become a cocoon relationship, you cannot keep your own personal sponsor for more than 6 years. You must change after 6 years. In the States, we make exception when people are beyond 75, because after a certain age can no longer accept the change. I mean, it doesn't work. And sometimes if you have somebody, for instance, who is deaf or something like that, we may have to keep the same sponsor longer, because either the person must be able to visit them. No, it's different from the spiritual director. It's somebody who helps you to make your decision for the ordinary life. Because your spiritual director doesn't lead the same kind of life. Because, okay, we have to live poorly. What does that mean? Because in different professions, and we have to live as people live in our milieu. And we have, in Caritas Christi, to look attractive. Oh, yes. So it's not the question of going to find the cheapest skirt or whatever, but how do you live it? For instance, as you know, Romuald, I do research in some very unusual field. I buy a lot of books. Okay, I lend them to my student and they will go to the university when I die. But your spiritual director, if he doesn't know anything about academic life, has no idea what would be normal for you in that kind of situation. So the personal sponsor live the same type of life, and you discuss with the person. And our constitution say then the personal sponsor does not tell you what you should do. It's more a sounding board. Of course, if you want to do something crazy, we expect she will tell you that. But it's typical of my secular institute. Other secular institutes don't have what we call the sponsor system.
So I want to thank Dr. Drouin for this insight into something that I don't know the rest of you, but this has been fascinating. I mean, because I knew nothing, next to nothing about it. I mean, I did know you could go online and say Secular Institute.